The next 3 weeks, the justice of God. So the next attribute is the justice of God. That'll be lesson 21 to 23. And then I think it would be a good time to take Aaron for Aaron to take a break and let either Cornell or Adam take over. I haven't really talked to you all about that too much, but it's time to take another break after the justice, I think. We just finished up on wisdom. There's lessons back there about wisdom if you want those lessons, but this is kicking off the justice of God and how we define the justice of God. And I guess the way some people like to try to define the justice of God is asking questions like, why do bad things happen to good people? And why do good things happen to bad people? Can you think of an example where, maybe in recent history, there was a good example in the book I was reading, but can you think of an example in recent history where something really, really bad happened to a lot of really, really good people?
9/11?
Yes, that was the one in the book. Did you read the book?
No, I just assumed when you were talking that sounds about
the
right.
example in the book was 9/11. Good people got up and went to work that day. Right? Bad people got up and went to work that day. And good people survived, and a lot of bad people survived, and good people perished, and some bad people perished. And where is the justice in all that?
Not in this world.
Right. Could you expand on that, Joe? I mean, not in this
Yeah.
world.
I think you have to have a eternal type view for something like that. I know Nora would speak about when we had Angela and so forth. We always, say, well, why did this happen? And I think you have to take a long-term view on things, and it kind of helps. It really does help a lot to do that.
That's a good point, Joe. Now let's think of something bad or something good that happened to some bad people in recent history.
Sorry, I
Oh,
wanted
go ahead.
to expand on the
Yeah,
last
please do.
question. I think this is where in Christianity we always talk about lost people. Why do we have to bring the good news to others? I think the 9/11 event is a very good example. In many ways, those people who were evil and bad, they thought they were doing good.
Right. Yeah,
I mean,
good
that's
point.
it, right?
Right, good point.
They thought they were going to go to heaven in their own. So that's where, if you're not touched by the love of Jesus, you don't have that understanding. It's God commanded us, you shall not kill, right? And so I think as a Christian, I always think about that. If even one of those guys were saved, maybe that wouldn't happen.
Right.
I mean, that
Right.
might be my naive way of thinking. But so my point is making sure to bring the good news to others.
Yes.
I
That's
also
a
think that,
great
you talk
twist.
about good things, bad things happening to us as Christians or good people, is two different things.
Yeah.
But we're talking about the principles of God that we studied a couple of weeks ago are universal. It's for all people at all times by all means. This action equals this consequence. I'm sorry, that's it. And we as a free people of choice are moving around in all of those consequences of everyone around us. So there's no way, unless we were put in a cocoon, of having anything negative ever touching us. So the Lord said, look, I can't have you rubbing shoulders with sin or dirt or consequences without you being affected, but what I'll do is I'll give you this to counteract. So the good and the bad consequences of things are just a part of being human.
Yeah, human's that's a good place, I think, to start. Because it's not human in the world is different from God and the eternal.
Spiritual.
Yeah.
And he tends to turn those bad things good eventually. I mean, you learn lessons out of it. Things certainly turn out much, much better than you thought they were to begin with. Those kinds of things. I mean, he uses them as lessons to teach you about him all the time. And he does that out of bad things.
But here's the, well, thank you. And here's the other question so is this life fair? Is it just?
Certainly not promised to be fair.
No, because when there is a sin, there's always consequences.
Yes.
Even though God is going to teach us, there's always consequences.
All right, so far, good. So far, we've heard the world, difference, big difference from the world and the eternal. We've heard human, sin.
What Joe's referring to, though, is not sin. It's just life.
Life, right? Consequences in life.
It's
and-
just life.
Yeah. Let's turn to, if we could please, turn to Genesis 18. You know, by the way, this is not the first example of the Bible. Can you think of probably the first example, but there's another, the first example in the Bible of where God had to administer justice was in, Genesis chapter 3. But this is an example, and I think a lot of people are familiar with this story, but this is an example where God has come to Abraham, and God is, before verse 25, God is kind of determining in himself, is he's saying, should I even let Abraham know that I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah? And then he decides, I guess I'll let Abraham know that I'm going to destroy it. And so God comes to Abraham, and if we pick it up in verse 25 here, who would read verse 25? This is Abraham's response to God telling him that he's going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah.
All right, I'll read it. That be far from thee to do after this manner, to slay the righteous with the wicked, and that the righteous should be as the wicked. That be far from thee, shall not judge of all the earth to do right.
Yes. Okay, so we don't. Abraham does not have the Bible, right? There's no 10 Commandments yet, and yet when God comes to him with this news, Abraham says, "Wait! Far be it from you, the judge of all the earth. You can't slay the wicked with the righteous. That's not equal." And then of course we know that we go into discourse. They go into a discourse about, well, what about 40? How about 30? How about 20? What about 10? And they settle on 10, right? And God does send angels to get Lot and his family out. But so here's Abraham, and he doesn't have the Bible. He doesn't have the 10 Commandments. They haven't been given yet. Yet his faith in God is enough that he knows, wait, a righteous judge is not going to slay the righteous and the wicked together. That's not righteous. And he challenges God. And I'm only making that point because when you think about justice, there's always a standard, and really a standard is just nothing more than drawing a line in the sand. And saying, on this side of the line, it's right. You cross the line, it's wrong. And so a good example of that is a speed limit, right? Right? A law, a standard would be, I noticed, I don't know if they've changed the signs. I always go, this is bad. This is terrible.
We all have the stories.
Yeah.
Or my-
I've always gone 55 down Peachtree. And I noticed, like, in front of South Forsyth High School, it's 45. And I was like, oh, I'm like 10 over. I'm like way over. But somehow I was able to convince myself that it was 55. It's not 55. Don't go 55. But okay, so here's the standard. There's a law that says 55 miles an hour. Well, what was I doing? What do we all like to do? We like to, we'd like to do this.
Little bit more.
This way. Come on, Let's move it. There's a little bit of wiggle.
Mm.
But when you think about what Abraham is saying here, is Abraham's saying there's a standard here. You've got the righteous over here, and you've got the wicked over here. And I think he was thinking of Lot. So he was probably thinking that Lot is a follower of God. But he's saying, should these get, is this equal? Or should they get equal treatment? And so he was defining a standard. Standards or laws allow us, this is number 2 under letter A. Standards or laws allow us to define morality. So God created standards, right? He created laws so that we could define right and wrong. So, right, on this side, this is the right side and this is the wrong side, you could say. But there's a standard. There's always a line in the sand. And in but I think it's important if we turn to Psalm 97. If you turn to Psalm 97, I think it's important to understand something about God. It says, clouds and darkness surround him. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne. So righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne. So when it comes to God, I think in God's case, I don't think he follows standards. He is the standard. So let's make sure we understand. Would you have any comments about that? That God is the standard. He's not following a standard. God isn't following a standard. God is the standard. That's why we should always go to him when we try to make judgments, right? We should always go to God to help us to help judge right from wrong.
And everything he has commanded us to do or provided us guidance is absolute. There is no sort of or maybe.
Are you saying he's not like us? Come on, let's get some wiggle in there. Come on, man, we like to move the. I mean, really? It's only 57, officer. I mean, you're really gonna ticket me for 57? Come on, really?
They won't.
They won't. Not because they're lazy. Anyway.
There you are.
Depends on the quarter.
Might be, does it
Yeah,
depend on?
that's
It's in a school zone, you betcha they will.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah, right, if it's in a
Yeah.
school zone,
It don't really-
but you know what, we play these games, don't we, all the time?
Yes.
Am I the only one that plays this game? But what you're saying is God's not that way. God is the stance. With God, it's like, this is it. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say is that, no, I think God encouraged Abraham to, let's have a discussion. Do you wanna know why I'm doing this? Because it's not the absolute, I'm gonna slam you guys and here it comes.
Sure.
It's like, do you understand my heart is broken over this town and to understand the heart of God? And Abraham wasn't talking about numbers.
Sure.
He was talking about, but if there's any hope, would you give us some mercy? If you think that there's 10 people, I mean, how low will you go, type of thing. So I think that as parents, I'll bring it back to parenting, you know when your child is being obstinate and in your face every time you make a rule, they're like, but I wanna go to bed 10 minutes later, 10 minutes later, I wanna do this, and you constantly just sort of like being worn down. And you get it's exhausting. I don't think God tolerates that from us. At
Right.
some point he goes, you will go to bed before 9 o'clock. Can I go to bed 5 minutes later? Why?
Yeah.
So I think that God knows our heart and knows whether or not we're just trying to get our own way or if we're truly trying to understand.
I agree. And what you brought up mercy. Would there be an opportunity for mercy if there weren't any standards? It's all part of judgment, isn't it?
But also that's all about why Jesus came, right? He gave us all the ultimate. He gave us something.
Yes.
Look at what Christ did when he had, I guess, the woman who basically came and basically, I guess, as far as his anointing and everything, with crying on his feet and the hair and everything. And the guy who is, I guess, a Pharisee, I think it was Nicodemus, saying,
Yes.
thinking, oh yeah, if he only knew. And he just looked at him and said, okay, if you had two people, one who owed you a lot of money in comparison, who would you think would be more wanting to be much more I guess, merciful and desiring to be closer to God? The one who sinned a lot or the one who sinned a little? And Nicodemus came back, so I guess the person who sinned a lot would be the one he said, yes, you're right.
That he who's forgiven much loves much, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so mercy comes into it, doesn't it? But without standards and laws and without the knowledge of breaking, the knowledge of the standard and laws and the breaking of the laws, there wouldn't be an opportunity for mercy.
I think if he tolerated our sin, then he would lower himself to our level.
Yeah.
He asks us to raise ourselves to his level rather than him lowering to ours. And since we can't do that, that's when he extends mercy.
Yes. Yeah. There's two parts to this. So part two is, so judgment is the application of equity to moral situations. So once a standard is defined, justice still involves judgment between the right side and the wrong side of the standard. And equity, so with justice, there comes a sense that of retribution or reaping, as the Bible might say. Reaping and from sowing, reaping what you sow. That's all part of justice. In equalizing, how do we equalize, how do we reward the good and judge the bad? That's all, God has given us a sense of this. He gave Abraham a sense of it. And God has, I think, instilled in us a sense of that. Punishment for the bad and rewards for the good. And he even says in Romans chapter 13, if you go to Romans chapter 13, read Romans chapter 13, 1 through 4. He even says that that's why God instituted human government. Right? There's obviously a sense of judgment. I'm not sure about the that circuit court in San Francisco, but overturning the will of the people. But other courts, that's what they're there for, right? Is to decide. Yes.
You just mentioned God has given us a sense. So that tells me that God has given all of us the capability of understanding the truth. And if you don't, that's how you get judged. This is a fair understanding of it.
Yes. I agree, yeah. In Proverbs, it says to bind truth and mercy around your neck. So truth and mercy go together. So I think whenever you have a standard, obviously there's going to be a level of mercy, right? Because if I get caught driving 58, there's a good chance that the police officer is going to show mercy. If I'm going 70, he's probably not going to be likely to show me mercy. So with standards, there's mercy, but there's truth. The truth of the fact of the matter is the speed limit is 55 miles an hour. That's it. That's the standard. It doesn't change.
There's no asterisk.
Yeah, there's no asterisk or anything like that. The fact of the matter is, God said don't commit false witness. Don't lie. So the standard is we shouldn't lie. Well, if you lie, you're on this side. If you tell the truth, you're on this side. Here, right? But there's, what do? We invent terms like white lie. Well, wait, it was for their good that I lied. Or if it was, did God change his standard? No. Yeah. So obviously there's mercy that goes with it, but I think that's all part of the fallenness of this world and not so much the eternal part of God. But
I was actually thinking about witnessing to others, people who are not, don't love Jesus. And sometimes you think, with their culture, or their background, or their upbringing, and you can come up with all these excuses, but if you are constantly talking to someone, and that person is not accepting the truth, has nothing to do with those, because if God has given him the same sense as given you or others, therefore they are responsible for their action. That's what my mind thinks.
yes. Well, I think he's given everyone a sense that conviction of sin, and I think that starts sometime. That conviction of sin starts with this concept of conscience and judgment and justice that he's given to us. But who had Romans 13, please? Romans chapter 13, 1 through 4.
I'll read it.
Thank you.
Let every soul be subject unto the high powers, for there is no power but of God, the powers that are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise in the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. For if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. For he beareth not the sword in vain, for he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil.
Amen. So, what is God saying? Now, in this, I think I got this wrong, obviously, 57 would be on the other side. So what is he saying? He's saying he's created human government to reward the good and to punish the evil. And so there is a difference, right? And I think sometimes our culture is, with all this going back and forth, our culture is trying to figure this out. I think there's some people in our culture that just don't even believe in evil.
I think also if you go to Psalms, it says, for the throne of corruption will be brought down low. And that's what kind of thing is like, well, if say a government is corrupt or if it's dishonest, eventually it will catch up. God's laws will always persist. The Bible will never go away. It is the Word of God, and it has that effect. If we choose leaders or people who are of corrupt nature, we will eventually pay for it eventually, catches up to us eventually.
And of course, you're defining corruption as those that cannot properly execute the judgment that it's talking about in Romans 13.
Right.
Is that kind of, I mean, they're blurring all the lines, right? Is that what you would?
Yeah,
describe as?
I mean, this is really the law. This is really what I think Andrew Jackson one time said, the foundation of the republic is the Bible. And if we ever get away from the Bible, then the foundation will crumble.
Really, I guess to sum it up in letter B there, I think justice means that people are supposed to get what they deserve, based on God's clear understanding of what they did and why they did it.
Aaron, can we throw in Daniel
Sure.
4:17?
Go ahead and read it.
The sentence is by the decree of the watchers, the decision by the word of the holy ones, to the end that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will, and sets over it the lowliest of men. That was a response from my friend in Oregon when I was whining about the current no-name administration and followers and such. Which I know that. I know God gives all the power, blah, blah, blah. And he limits it. And then I was reading further in another book I have about, and this may not even wind back around to what we're saying, but anyhow, he gives the power, the authority, and he also limits that, which we know, thankfully, but he limits the evil as well with the choices that they make. So she sent that for me, I guess, more or less to let me quit whining about certain issues.
Yeah. I think when it comes to human government and justice, we've been given the opportunity to elect people that think this is right, that this is God's law, and that we should, this is the foundation of our legal system. We've been given that opportunity. And the people that believe this don't always get elected, do they? And sometimes the people that don't believe it get elected, and that's kind of where we stand. And so the lines are getting blurred all over the place. But let's do those are kind of the two parts of justice. Does anybody have any comments about that?
I just wanted to reminisce of when I was growing up, my mother's way of disciplining was.
Oh, there's some justice there.
I was sharing a bedroom with my sister most of my growing up, and when we get in bed, we'd love to talk and giggle and make noise. And my mother would stand outside the room and say, "Girls, quiet." Second time, "Girls, be quiet." Third time, "If you don't hush, I'm gonna spank both of you." Well, I'm a good one.
Oh, you are?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I was in there going,
Good to know.
"Be quiet," and she would get zzz, and my mother would come in and slap both of us, and I was like, "That's so unfair." But you know what? I made my sister shut up next time. So I think that when it comes to voting, I'm bringing it around, Sarah, that it's the same concept. Like God said, look, I'm telling you, do this. And a lot of times we don't always have the dictation of the results, but at the same time, we're gonna get the same discipline as everybody in the room. So this time, I mean, if you really care, then you need to make a change. You need to be, actively trying to make a change and shut the sister up, right?
Yeah.
So I think that God sometimes involves us in disciplines that we don't think is fair because we're in the same room.
Right. That's a good point. And it doesn't seem just.
No,
It doesn't seem equal.
she was a brat her whole life too.
It's gonna rain on the just and the unjust.
That's a good
Yeah.
point, Sarah.
I mean, that's.
You're right. That's is that Ecclesiastes, I think it is, or,
Somewhere.
yeah, it rains on the just and the unjust, right?
And there's another I can't find, I've been thinking, trying to remember, 'cause I just recently read, there's no shadow of turning,
Right.
and that ties in with God's standards.
Standards, yes.
He doesn't waver one gazillionth,
Right.
.
I think we need to be clear about that. In a fallen world, there's a bunch of blurred lines, right? The lines are always moving. And there's a lot of injustice, but with God, there's no injustice. Let's look at the, I think part of defining God's justice is considering eternity and his relationship to a fallen world. In Genesis 1 and 2, what's the scene in Genesis 1 and 2? In Genesis 1 and 2, you have Eden, you have a perfect world, you have a just God ruling over a perfect environment, and man has direct access to God in a paradise-like setting, right? A perfect setting. But God is still just. Why? It was a perfect setting, but it still had what? In that perfect setting, there was still but there was still a standard. So even in Eden, this is part of who God is. Even in a perfect setting, in the new creation of man, he still put a standard there. This helps define God. It helps us understand who God is. So even in a perfect setting in Genesis 1 and 2, there was still a standard. Right? Okay, so then what happens in Genesis 3? The devil shows up, right?
They ate the fruit.
Yeah. They break the
They
standard.
broke the standard.
Yeah. Was it the devil's fault?
No.
He was given permission to test.
Man, was it the woman's fault?
Yes. Well, he was quick on that one.
And you know why? You know why? It's because the man didn't
You
slam
don't have to
us.
do things like that.
The man should exercise his authority.
that, the man was passive.
Yeah, he did not.
Praise
you,
sister.
Women are always voice of reason. Like, what's wrong with, women are always the voice of reason, like, what's wrong with the apple? You know?
Oh,
Yeah.
goodness. Goodness. Okay, everyone move away from body. I'm not afraid of his aim, just the flying body parts.
Like, women always bring out the other rational side to
Oh,
the argument,
yeah.
so, yeah, the man didn't have enough strength to.
But-
See, when you think about standard, standard is not to limit us in any way, shape, or form, our freedom and our joy.
Yes.
I think the standard was a proof that we love God. And that's why I think God, because God created us with a will, He didn't create robots.
Yes.
Right.
He created us to choose to love Him, to choose to
Amen.
obey Him.
Yes.
The standard was there as a test more than anything, to prove our love, and like it is today. Jesus said, if you love me, you will obey me. You don't need standards. Our New Testament is not a bunch of rules or do's and don'ts. It's a relationship, a love relationship.
Yes.
Based on what God did for you and me, we're supposed to return that love and never disobey Him, and within our powers, as much as we can. But if we do, there is a remedy. There is.
But that's not, to your point, Bo, but what you're saying is not contradicting the fact that we love a just God, that God is going to reward the evil and the good, right? I mean, you're not saying that.
No, I'm not.
No, I mean, you're not. I
I'm
mean,
just, yeah, basically.
because people get mixed up, don't they?
Yeah, unfortunately.
They stop seeing God for who. I mean, the fact of the matter is, God is a just God.
See,
But-
God's justice, when you think about it, it's almost really impossible to understand, comprehend,
Yeah.
because you look at all the stuff, there were incidents in the Old Testament when God decided He's gonna destroy Israel. Doesn't mean 100% of the people in Israel were evil.
Right.
He yet destroyed them. When the Babylonians came, or the Romans, they just wiped everything out. God didn't pick him or her, okay, I'm gonna pull them out. Sometimes He does that, but it's not the standard always. So it's like, for us, just as, when you see good things happen to evil people, you kind of, something within you revolts. It's human nature. We cannot, for me personally anyway, I have a hard time understanding God's judgment or justice when it comes to, how can that be? But literally, I have to revert back to the belief that God is a righteous God, that He's a holy God. He cannot do anything wrong. So whatever He determines is going to happen, it's the right thing to happen. For whatever reason that I have no comprehension of at this point in my being, And it's very hard to understand God's justice really, in essence, because it's just can't think that way because of sin in our lives.
Yes, and you bring up a good point, I think, because you can't just say, this is the whole, remember you can't say or. We cannot use the word or with God, right? Because God is good, right, and sovereign, and loving, and just. He's all these things, isn't he? So, and that's the whole thing. But that's one of them, right? But somehow, and I think where it's all summed up the best, and we're going to get to this real quick. But in Genesis 3, obviously influenced by the evil one, man was held accountable. Would you say? That was the first judgment on man. The first judgment on man was in the garden when they got expelled from the garden. Paradise is over, and now the world is fallen and full of sin. Just the fact that it's full of sin, I think, I've heard preaching on this, just the fact that God allows sin is a judgment. He could have just ended it all right there, right? And said, I'm not going to allow this. Just the fact that we live in a fallen world is judgment. And the fact that countries, like you say, as they get more and more corrupt and they just begin to fail, that's part of the judgment, is to corrupt, the evolution towards, I mean, look at all the nations that have just evolved into oblivion. right? That's judgment that's just judgment in a fallen world. But that's the first judgment. Revelation 20, God's relationship with fallen humanity. So after Genesis 3, his relationship is with fallen humanity. In Revelation 20, God's relationship with fallen humanity will end. It will end. It will come to an end. When will it come to an end? At what
He says
event?
so.
Revelation 20, what event?
No, I was asking when he says so, I don't
Yeah,
know.
I mean, he says so. But what's the last judgment?
The last judgment, right before the last judgment, that's it.
Yeah, the great white throne judgment will be the last judgment.
That's when he's gonna separate.
Sheep from the goat.
He's gonna separate. You wanna expand on that?
Yeah, because that's after the judgment, based on what you did while you were alive. You have, prepare yourself to go to heaven, or qualify yourself, whatever you wanna put it, to Jesus Christ, or where you prepare for heaven, or if you disobeyed, then you go to hell, and that would be the last chance ever.
So there's a last judgment coming. So the first judgment was in Genesis 3. The last judgment is Revelation 20. What is in between those two bookends?
Life.
Life in a perfect environment?
I think the most
We're not
significant,
down.
Yeah.
I think the most significant part of that coming of Jesus. I think if you look at the Old Testament, 55 or 65, that was it. Still, that hasn't changed. But when we fall short, there's somebody already have been crucified for us. The only thing is, I think as a Christian, you have to be careful. I hear sometimes, oh yes, I know I fall short, I'm saved by the grace of Jesus. It's absolutely correct. But you can, how do you say, you cannot pay attention to what was taught to us in the Old Testament. Actually, Jesus never said you're not good, or don't follow it, or things have changed. He just gave us a way when we fall short, that you're not following from grace of God.
Go back to my parenting discipline thing, it's kinda like, wait till your father gets home. Like, we know what happened is wrong, and you got 4 hours to fret about it till he gets home.
Is that how you do the white throne? Is that what you're saying?
Okay, show me your record.
But to Adam's point, in between the bookends of the first judgment and the last judgment, God is he's working out redemption in a fallen world full of injustices. This is, I think, redemption, his redemptive plan accounts for all of his attributes. All of his attributes pour into that plan. And the wisdom that it takes. So if you look at that diagram at the bottom, that's just an example of eternity past. And what happens, you got the first judgment right after Genesis 2, and you've got the last judgment right before Revelation 21 and 22. And thank God he's given us the end of the story, right? We know the ending. And it's a happy ending and a victorious ending for those that have been redeemed. But without justice, could there be redemption? Without justice, could there be redemption? Right. So if God were not just, where would we even need redemption? So God is a righteous judge, and though the world is unfair, God is not. So I think to Joe's first point, the world is definitely unfair. There's nothing in this world that seems fair. But, I think one day, God is going to level it, and it will be level. One day. One day, the perfectly just God, is going to level it. And it's interesting the way, Cornell described it, is he's going to separate. So there will be a line drawn, and the line is the cross. The cross of Jesus Christ, the blood of Jesus Christ shed for us. And has it been applied or not applied? I'm not sure I'm wordsmithing that exactly right, but, yes, sir.
Yeah, I got a question here, cause I know, I've heard that God is really protecting, like Israel, because they're the chosen one, and whoever, is for Israel, like U.S., you know, God is also gonna bless the U.S. Cause I've noticed that, in the past years, like, you know, like what happened to Asia, a disaster happened back in 2000, the tsunami.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, if you really think about it, it's like Indonesia is like majority are Muslims, you know. So, is it that disaster, God allowed that disaster to happen because as a punishment to these people who are not Christian?
I don't know, it's a fallen, I think it's a fallen world, and there's tsunamis in a fallen, sinful, dreadful world. I mean, nature was also once perfect, you know, the lion laid down with the lamb and all that. Now there's survival, and it's survival of the fittest in a fallen world. And I think tsunamis and tornadoes and natural disasters and earthquakes are part of a fallen world. It's just
Remember?
cursed. I guess it's cursed. That's just part of the general overall curse. Did he specifically have someone in mind in Indonesia to punish? I don't know. I don't know.
Remember Job, when Satan gave permission when God gave permission to Satan to affect Job's life, what did Satan do? He used forces of nature first time around to destroy his children. Then he used evil people to kill and steal everything he had. So Satan does use nature, the forces of nature that God created, to accomplish his goals, basically. The fact that God allowed it, who knows, we'll know one day, but it's hard to tell if that was God's punishment or not. It could have been. Because the witchcraft going on there and the idol worship is beyond belief.
Well, could you look at it though as being maybe not a punishment, but an opportunity to
Wake up.
recognize,
Mhm.
wake up, recognize, you know, that there is a powerful God out there.
Yeah.
Maybe it's, we're looking at it totally different from what maybe perhaps God's purpose was.
Yeah, I
or
think,
is.
but to his point, I think, to Cornell's point, is the devil is probably the one executing the tsunami.
I don't believe
God,
that at all.
you know?
I mean, otherwise, he has it really out for Alabama. I mean, they're getting crushed
York
all the
City.
time, or Louisiana. I mean, they're in a weather pattern. I
But
mean,
can
the
God
devil's
do-
not out trying
yeah.
to slap the people of the South.
Yeah, yeah.
But-
Now, I was gonna think that, it's like, okay, if God was punishing Indonesia, what did he have against Alabama? Right, I mean,
I think we're.
that's
a
why you
fav-
gotta be careful
I
with
think we're
this.
a
I think
favored
you need to take
nation,
God
right,
out of
Joe?
it. I honestly do in some ways. You can't totally remove God from it, right? But you can't pin it on God either.
He can protect you from those,
You,
but
you can't do either. I think the fact of the matter is, this is a cursed world we live in. It's cursed. It has tornadoes. It has tsunamis. It has earthquakes. It's cursed. It's far from perfect. And that's part of the first judgment, is that it's a cursed earth we live on. Bad things happen all the time.
And it could be worse.
that's right, you're
Yeah.
protected most of the time. when we're
Yeah, that's what I'm
delivered
saying,
by
that, article I read was saying, you
We're
know,
back to
he
the
limits.
beginning of the
You
message,
can't
aren't we?
preach on that.
We're just being circular now. Woo, I don't think your teacher, the instructor did not accomplish his objective. We did not bring this to a point.
You
You did
can't
make-
answer that question. You
But
just
I-
can't.
We-
Yeah.
Those are things we won't know.
I've heard
Yeah.
ministers on the radio be dogmatic about it, you know. like,
Sure.
God judges that group.
Yeah, you're right.
And
You're right.
he doesn't know the mind of God. You
That's
know,
right,
we
brother.
can't
Yes.
That's right, yeah.
put that in there, and,
Mhm.
you know, I mean, if you're dogmatic about something like that, there's a lot of things we shouldn't be dogmatic about, cause we really don't know.
Mm.
And that's really one of them, that's kinda the way I look at it.
Yes.
Well, it plainly says, his ways are not our ways, his thoughts are not our thoughts. So therefore, that's why I'm trying to say, we don't know.
Right.
Amen.
We just don't know what his purpose for these events
We're
happening.
dying to know though.
Oh, honey, we're
Yeah.
curious, can't stand it, but you know
Solomon
what?
says, asking the question, why God? It's a good question, but it's not the wisest question.
Yeah, I
The
do.
wisest question he implies is trying to find out what God's plan is in all this, even though you don't understand why.
You just have to trust that he knows what he's
Mhm.
doing.
It's what Paul was saying about the wisdom of God. It's past finding out.
Yeah.
It's beyond finding out. Right? I mean, that's all you can say. I will say this though, let's as we study the justice of God, we do know that there was a first judgment, right? And we do know that there's going to be a final judgment. So bringing it back to God, and maybe getting it out of the horizontal, right, out of this world, back to God. God is a perfectly just God. The lines are drawn, the lines are straight. We don't always maybe we don't always understand in our fallenness, always understand where the lines are, but God does have things drawn on, right?
The one word that going back to talking is time. We keep thinking something happened, God, so you better, hit them bad right now. And he's like, when he doesn't, then we're like, why? And we don't understand God's timing. And I think that we can logically decide that God's in charge and he'll do the right things, but a lot of times we don't understand why he doesn't handle it right then. And his time is not we're on different playing fields when it comes to God's timing.
No doubt. There will be things we will never understand until we get to heaven.
Cause you know what, Bonnie, he may be handling something else somewhere else,
Exactly,
you
he's
know,
working
I
it to our good, he
Yeah,
promised
he's,
that.
he's handling something else at a different location, right?
Why don't
Got this
we,
on the back burner.
That's
I need to dismiss, I'm sorry, I'm
Oh,
gonna make
come
you
on,
all
Aaron.
late for church. I'm gonna make you all late for church. Father in heaven, we're so thankful that you are a just God and that one day the playing field will be utterly leveled. And part of that, we really should be fearful of it, but then the other part is we should be looking forward to it as well. Help that to motivate us to reach out to people and show them the love of Jesus. Please bless the next service. Please bless our upcoming weeks. And please answer the prayer requests that were submitted today before your throne. Thank you for that. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen.